Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the RotoBaller Radio Sleeper and Value Play Series. I'm your host, Anthony Aniano. Happy to be with you here today as we take a look at the Sleeper and Value Plays for Week 18 of the fantasy football season, the final week of the NFL regular season. Guys, we got to be careful with the lineups this week, right? Some teams won't play their starters the whole game, depending on how much they have invested in the game. We have a slew of backup quarterbacks in lineups this week. So if you're looking at DFS formats, if your fantasy regular season is not over yet and you still have one more week, here are a few players to consider getting in your lineup for Week 18. And we start at the quarterback position where we have two options this week. First up, Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers against an Arizona Cardinals team that has absolutely nothing to play for. Yet the 49ers with an outside chance of still getting a top seed and a bye in the NFC. Brock Purdy is currently $5,700 on DraftKings, averaging 11.3 fantasy points per game. However, in his last 5 games, he's gotten 15 or more fantasy points in a DraftKings format, with 2 touchdown passes in each of those 5 games. And he goes against an Arizona Cardinals defense that is 23rd in the league in defending opposing quarterbacks, allowing 21.6 fantasy points per game to the position, and that has allowed the 4th most passing touchdowns in the league with 26 passing touchdowns already this season. Deebo Samuel practiced in full on Wednesday, a chance he plays this weekend as San Francisco getting healthier, getting ready for the playoffs, and if there's a chance at the number 1 seed, those 49ers should stay in the game a little longer than one would expect. Now, if you're concerned about Brock Purdy playing the whole game, if you're concerned San Francisco pulls some starters, maybe a big lead early on, take a look at a player who has something to prove, and that's Jarrett Stidham of the Las Vegas Raiders against the Kansas City Chiefs. Stidham impressed me. He surprised me last week when he went 23 of 34, 365, and 3 touchdowns, although 2 interceptions. He also ran the ball 7 times for 34 yards, 31 fantasy points in DraftKings format. Now, he's still only $5,400 on DraftKings, and it's a terrific matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, again, Kansas City is playing for the 1 seed and the bye, and we'll see how that all shakes out, how the NFL shakes that out with Buffalo and the game cancellation and all the tragedy that happened there. But nonetheless, Jarrett Stidham faces a Kansas City defense that is 29th in the league against opposing quarterbacks. 24.2 fantasy points per game allowed to the quarterback position to the Kansas City Chiefs. And in fact, the Kansas City Chiefs have allowed this season the most passing touchdowns in the league, with 32 passing touchdowns on already at this point this season. With one more game left, Jarrett Stidham against that secondary, he'll play the whole game. If Kansas City plays the whole game, the Raiders will be forced to throw the ball. Stidham could be in line for 1 or 2 more touchdown passes and is only $5,400 on DraftKings. At the running back position, although there's nothing to play for, Zach Moss will be the featured running back for the Indianapolis Colts against the Houston Texans. And that's the key against the Houston Texans. Sam Ehlinger getting the start for the Colts, so Zach Moss can see plenty of action. He's had 51 carries over the last 3 weeks, 65 or more yards in all 3 of those 3 games. 8 or more fantasy points along that time span. Nothing outrageous. However, he's $5,200 on DraftKings, and he's going against that Houston Texans defense that's dead last against opposing running backs. 31.2 points per game in a PPR format, the most in the league. The Houston Texans have allowed 21 rushing touchdowns already this season, the most in the league. Zach Moss, not the best back in the league, but he's got the best matchup this week, Week 18. Take a look also at the running back position at A.J. Dillon Sunday night against the Detroit Lions. Green Bay, it's very simple. Green Bay wins, they're in the playoffs. So they have something to play for. And A.J. Dillon goes up against the Detroit Lions. Now, Dillon, $5,600 on DraftKings, averaging 10.3 points per game in a DK format. Now, A.J. Dillon has 5 straight games of 10 or more fantasy points. He's got a touchdown in all 5 of those games. In fact, 7 touchdowns on the season, 6 of them over the last 5 games. Now, Detroit, 9th in the league at defending the running back. They've been good of late against running backs. They only allow 20.5 fantasy points per game. However, they are tied for the 3rd most rushing touchdowns allowed this season with 15. Now, I'm not saying A.J. Dillon's going to go for 120 yards, but when you're facing a Lions defense that's given up 15 touchdowns, 3rd most in the league, there is a chance for A.J. Dillon to cross the goal line and get you 1 or 2 TDs in this week 18 matchup. At the wide receiver position, Saturday night special, Tennessee, Jacksonville, and folks, load up on your Jaguars as they are playing. A victory gets them the AFC South championship and a trip to the postseason. So my first choice here at the wide receiver position from Jacksonville is Zay Jones. 5,000 on DraftKings, averaging 13.2 fantasy points per game. Now, in his last 6 games, he's been inconsistent, I'll admit it. In his last 6 games, he's got 1 game of over 20 fantasy points, 2 games of over 30 fantasy points. You love those numbers. However, the other 3 out of 6 have been less than 6 fantasy points. But keep in mind, a few weeks back when Tennessee and Jacksonville last played, Zay Jones went 8 receptions, 77 yards, and a touchdown. That's over 20 fantasy points. Last time Jacksonville played Tennessee, he had a terrific game. Tennessee is 32nd in the league, dead last, in allowing PPR points to opposing wide receivers, 40.9. They've allowed the second most touchdowns to opposing wide receivers with 19 on the season. Trevor Lawrence is in a great spot. Tennessee is banged up on offense. Trevor Lawrence should be able to throw the ball against this Tennessee secondary. I like Christian Kirk. Zay Jones at 5,000 on DraftKings. Terrific value. My second wide receiver is Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets against the Miami Dolphins. Now, I'll acknowledge the fact he hasn't done much the last 2 weeks. In fact, only 45 receiving yards combined over the last 2 weeks. However, over those last 2 games, he has been targeted 20 times, averaging 10 targets per game over the last 2. He is still the feature wide receiver on this New York Jets offense. He's priced at $5,800 on DraftKings, averaging 13 fantasy points per game. In a game against the Miami Dolphins, a Dolphins team that is in complete free fall, let's acknowledge it, both teams are in reality. I like Mike White's ability to get Garrett Wilson the ball against Miami, who are 19th in the league against opposing wide receivers at 33.1 fantasy points per game, and Miami has allowed 10 touchdowns on the year to the wide receiver position. And my final sleeper and value play for Week 18 is back in Jacksonville. It's tight end Evan Ingram against the Tennessee Titans. Now, in season-long formats, he's a must-start, and he's probably starting across the board. However, on DraftKings, I still find his price low, and it's come up from recent weeks, but it's still only $4,500. That is terrific value to plug him in and be able to spend higher money or more money on other players at other positions. $4,500 on DraftKings, 11 points per game. He's got 27 targets in his last 4 games. And the last time Jacksonville and Tennessee met, like Zay Jones, who had that big game himself, Evan Ingram had an even larger game. Evan Ingram went 11 catches, 162 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Bottom line, this Tennessee Titans defense cannot cover anybody. So take advantage of that Saturday night by using Zay Jones or using Evan Ingram. Tennessee is 29th in the league defending opposing tight ends, allowing 15.9 fantasy points per game, and have allowed 8 passing touchdowns to the tight end position on the season. Okay? So in summary, for the Week 18 sleeper and value plays, quarterbacks, Brock Purdy or Jarrett Stidham of the Raiders. Running backs, Zach Moss, A.J. Dillon. Wide receivers, Zay Jones, Garrett Wilson, and a tight end, Evan Ingram. Folks, as always, thanks for watching all season long. Make sure you like and subscribe right here to the RotoBaller YouTube channel as we guide you through the rest of the fantasy season, including the NFL playoffs. Give me a follow on Twitter at Aniano Fantasy. head over to rotoballer.com right now. Sign up, subscribe using the premium packages using the promotional code ACES. Download RotoBaller's free app on your phone for all the latest news and information, courtesy of rotoballer.com. Give me a follow on Twitter at @Aniano Fantasy. Good luck this weekend, and we'll see you next time right here on RotoBaller Radio.